The Duke hid his face, but not the pain she saw when he heard her cry alone, 1917. The spring rain fell hard against the windows of the Newport mansion, each drop a reminder that even the wealthiest corners of Rhode Island couldn't escape the storms. Eleanor Hartwell pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the ocean churn grey and violent beyond the manicured lawns. 23 years old, and she felt ancient. The engagement ring on her finger, a flawless diamond that caught no light on this dark afternoon, weighed more than any chain. Her mother's voice drifted up from the parlour below, sharp and certain as always, discussing wedding arrangements with Mrs. Vanderberg, two society matrons planning a merger disguised as matrimony. Eleanor's impending marriage to Thomas Vanderberg III would unite two shipping fortunes, secure her family's position, and fulfill every expectation placed upon her since birth. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like drowning. Before we continue with Eleanor's story, I'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Now let's return to that rainy afternoon in Newport, where everything was about to change. The doorbell's chime cut through the sound of rain. Eleanor heard the butler's measured footsteps, the creak of the heavy oak door, and then voices. Her father's booming welcome, and another quieter, unfamiliar. Male. Accented with something foreign she couldn't quite place. Miss Eleanor. Martha, her lady's maid, appeared in the doorway. Your father requests your presence in the library. There's a visitor. Eleanor smoothed her afternoon dress, pale blue silk that her mother insisted brought out her eyes, and descended the curved staircase with practiced grace. The library door stood half open, releasing the scent of leather and pipe tobacco. Her father, Charles Hartwell, stood beside the fireplace with a man Eleanor had never seen before. He was tall, perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar despite obvious attempts to tame it. His suit was well made but worn at the cuffs, and he stood with military straightness that seemed both natural and deliberate. But it was his face that made Eleanor's breath catch, or rather the left side of it, which bore scarring from temple to jaw, the kind of marks that spoke of fire or explosion. The skin was healed but permanently altered, pulling slightly at the corner of his eye and mouth. Eleanor, my dear, her father gestured warmly. This is Mr. Dominic Ashford. He comes to us with excellent recommendations from the British government. He'll be cataloguing our collection of European manuscripts and preparing them for donation to Yale. Miss Hartwell. The man's voice was cultured, educated, and carried the weight of someone who'd learned to speak carefully. He bowed slightly, but didn't extend his hand, perhaps sensing her hesitation, perhaps protecting himself from her reaction to his appearance. Mr. Ashford, Eleanor curtsied, hating herself for the automatic formality, for the way her eyes had lingered on his scars, for the fact that she couldn't look away now. But it wasn't revulsion she felt, it was recognition. The same trapped feeling she saw in her own mirror stared back at her from his one slightly hooded eye. Dominic served in France, her father continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. Invalided out after Verdun. He's been doing archival work in Boston, but I convinced him to come here for the summer. The cottage behind the stables has been prepared for him. The servants' cottage. Eleanor's mother would have a fit. Mr. Ashford insisted, her father said with a chuckle. Says he prefers privacy for his work. Can't say I blame him. The main house gets rather crowded during the season. I'm grateful for your family's hospitality, Ashford said, and this time his eyes met Eleanor's directly. They were dark grey, like the ocean outside, and held something she couldn't name. I promised to stay out of your way. But he didn't stay out of her way. How could he, when the library, her sanctuary, became his workspace? Eleanor had always loved the library, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and rolling ladder, the window seat where she'd spent her childhood reading books her mother didn't approve of. Her father's collection included everything from medieval prayer books to Renaissance poetry, acquired over decades of European travel. Now Dominic Ashford was there every morning when she arrived, carefully examining vellum pages with white-gloved hands, making notes in a leather journal, occasionally speaking into a recording device that captured his observations for the Yale scholars who would receive these treasures. The first week, they barely spoke. Eleanor would settle into her window seat with whatever novel she'd smuggled past her mother's watchful eye, and Ashford would work at the long table, his damaged profile turned slightly away from her, though whether from consideration or self-consciousness, she couldn't tell. The second week, it rained for 3 days straight, turning the grounds into a mud-slicked mess and trapping them both indoors. On the third afternoon, Eleanor's book slipped from her hands and landed with a heavy thud. Ashford looked up, startled, then saw the title, The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. "Lily Bart," he said quietly, "not the most cheerful companion for a rainy afternoon." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, caught reading something her mother called unnecessarily tragic. "You've read it?" "In France. A fellow officer's sister sent him a care package with 6 novels. We passed them around until they fell apart." His fingers returned to the manuscript before him, but his voice continued, almost as if speaking to himself. "Funny thing about trenches. They make you appreciate stories about drawing rooms and society dinners. Made civilization seem worth fighting for, even when you couldn't remember what it looked like anymore." Eleanor studied his profile, the way his jaw tightened as he spoke. "Do you miss it?" "England. I'm American." The correction was gentle but firm. "My father was the second son of a minor English lord. No title, no fortune, just enough connections to make him useless. He immigrated to Boston, married my mother, and built a successful import business. I was born in Massachusetts, raised in New York, educated at Harvard." "Then why do you sound British?" Now he did turn to face her fully, letting her see the scarred side without flinching. 3 years in the British Army changes how you speak. Changes everything, really. But you're American. Why were you fighting for Britain? Because America wasn't in the war yet. Because I was in London when it started, finishing my doctorate in medieval literature. Because they needed men and I was young and stupid enough to believe it would be over by Christmas. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his hands had stilled on the manuscript. "I joined up in August 1914, got my face rearranged at Verdun in February 1916, spent 8 months in hospitals, got discharged last summer, been back in America ever since, trying to figure out what to do with a medieval literature degree and a face that makes children cry." "Children are idiots," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Ashford's laugh was unexpected, genuine, transforming his entire face. "You're not wrong, but their mothers tend to agree with them." He returned to his work, but something had shifted between them. The silence was no longer awkward, but companionable. The next morning, Eleanor found him examining a 14th-century book of hours, its illuminated pages brilliant with gold leaf and lapis lazuli. She drifted closer, drawn by the exquisite miniature paintings of saints and seasons. "It's French," Ashford said without looking up, "created around 1380 for a wealthy merchant's family. See how the prayers are personalized? That tells us they commissioned it specifically rather than buying from a standard workshop." Eleanor leaned over his shoulder, close enough to smell ink and old paper and something else. Soap, perhaps, or the rain-fresh air that clung to his clothes from his morning walk. "How can you tell?" "The calendar includes specific feast days for saints popular in Lyon, and this miniature here." His gloved finger hovered over a scene of a family at prayer. "The faces are too detailed to be generic. Someone cared deeply about preserving these specific people. Did it work? Eleanor whispered. Are they still here in these pages? Ashford turned to look at her, really look at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart race. Yes, he said softly. I believe they are. We remember them through their choices, their devotions, what they valued enough to preserve. What will people remember about us? The question escaped before Eleanor could consider its weight. That depends entirely on what we choose to value. His eyes held hers for a moment that stretched too long, that meant too much. Then he returned to his work, and Eleanor retreated to her window seat with shaking hands. That evening, during dinner with her parents and Thomas van der Berg, Eleanor pushed lamb chops around her plate and barely heard the conversation about Newport's upcoming charity gala. Thomas was handsome in the way all wealthy young men of her class were handsome, well-groomed, well-dressed, well-mannered, and utterly interchangeable. He spoke about his father's ships, his plans to expand their routes to South America, his expectations for their marriage as if discussing a business merger, which, of course, it was. Eleanor's been spending quite a bit of time in the library, her mother said with pointed disapproval. I hope she's not neglecting her social obligations. The library? Thomas looked puzzled. I thought that scholar fellow was using it. Mr. Ashford, Eleanor said, surprised by the defensive edge in her voice. He's cataloguing Father's manuscript collection. Ah, yes, the Englishman with the scarred face. Thomas's tone was careless, dismissive. Pity about what happened to him, but rather careless to go fighting in someone else's war, don't you think? Eleanor's fork clattered against her plate. America is in the war now too. He was just early. Eleanor, her mother's voice held warning, but Eleanor couldn't stop. He was brave enough to fight when it wasn't even his country's battle yet. What's careless about that? Thomas laughed uncomfortably. My dear, you sound quite passionate about it. I simply meant that a man should think of his future, his face, his prospects. War is for men with nothing to lose, or men with everything they believe is worth fighting for. The table fell silent. Eleanor's father studied her with new attention, while her mother's face reddened with embarrassment. Thomas looked genuinely confused, as if Eleanor had suddenly started speaking another language. After dinner, Eleanor escaped to the terrace, gulping the salt air like medicine. The Newport cliffs dropped away into darkness, and somewhere out there, ships carried soldiers to France, to the war America had finally joined 3 weeks ago. How many more young men would come home with faces that made children cry? How many wouldn't come home at all? Miss Hartwell. She turned to find Ashford standing in the shadows near the library's terrace door, as if he'd been there all along. Or perhaps he'd just emerged, drawn by the sound of her raised voice during dinner. Mr. Ashford, I didn't mean to disturb your work. You didn't. I heard... He hesitated, then stepped into the light cast by the house windows. Thank you for what you said at dinner. How did you... The library shares a ventilation shaft with the dining room, servants' gossip highway, but it works both ways. He moved closer until they stood side by side at the terrace railing. You didn't have to defend me. I wasn't defending you, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the truth. I was defending the idea that some things matter more than prospects and propriety. And does your fiancé agree? Thomas thinks the war is bad for business. He's applied for an exemption as an essential shipping executive. She laughed bitterly. My mother applauds his practicality, but you don't. I don't know what I think anymore. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm May evening. I used to believe I knew exactly who I was and what my life would be. Now I look at that ring on my finger and feel like I'm watching someone else's future unfold. Ashford was quiet for a long moment. Then, in the trenches, we used to play a game. What's the first thing you'll do when you get home? Simple question, but it separated the survivors from the casualties, the ones who could answer, really answer with specific sensory details. Those were the ones who made it, the ones who couldn't imagine a future. They were already ghosts. What was your answer? Read a book that wasn't falling apart, drink coffee that didn't taste like mud, sleep in a bed that didn't shake with artillery fire. He turned to face her. What's yours, Eleanor? Not what you're supposed to want. What do you actually want? The first thing, the truest thing. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her parents, not Thomas, not her friends who spoke in the same practiced platitudes about duty and family and doing what was expected. Eleanor opened her mouth and found herself crying instead of speaking, great gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and desperate. Ashford didn't touch her. Propriety wouldn't allow it, and perhaps his own careful distance from the world prevented it. But he stood close enough that she could feel the solid presence of him, the way he didn't flinch from her tears, the way Thomas would have, the way he simply waited while she fell apart on a terrace in Newport, Rhode Island, in the spring of 1917. When she could breathe again, Eleanor whispered the truth she'd never admitted to anyone. I want to matter, not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as myself. I want to do something real, something that can't be replaced by any other well-bred girl with the right last name. Then do it, Ashford said simply. How? I'm engaged. The wedding's in 3 months. My entire life is already planned. Plans change, wars start, ships sink, faces get burned. His voice was gentle but unflinching. The question isn't whether your life will change, Eleanor. It's whether you'll have any say in how it does. Before she could respond, the terrace door opened and her mother appeared, silhouetted against the light. Eleanor, what are you doing out here alone? She's not alone, Mrs. Hartwell, Ashford said smoothly, stepping back into the shadows. I was just discussing the manuscript collection with Miss Eleanor. She has quite a good eye for illuminated work. Eleanor's mother looked between them with suspicion but couldn't quite articulate her concern without sounding ridiculous. Well, it's late. Eleanor, you should retire. We have the charity committee meeting tomorrow morning. As Eleanor passed Ashford on her way inside, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear, Courage isn't the absence of fear, Miss Hartwell. It's doing what matters anyway. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her 4-poster bed, staring at the canopy overhead, while rain began again outside her windows. She thought about Lily Bart, destroyed by a society that wouldn't bend to accommodate her humanity. She thought about Thomas, kind enough in his way but utterly incapable of seeing her as anything more than an ornament for his drawing room. She thought about her parents who loved her but loved their position more. And she thought about Dominic Ashford, who'd had half his face burned away in a war that wasn't his, and somehow emerged with more clarity about what mattered than anyone Eleanor had ever met. The rain fell harder. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard a sound. Crying? No, that couldn't be right. But there it was again, muffled and distant, but unmistakable. Eleanor rose from bed, pulled a wrapper over her nightgown, and moved silently through the sleeping house. The sound led her to the library, where a faint light glowed beneath the door. She pushed it open carefully, expecting to find Martha or one of the other servants. Instead, she found Ashford sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that came from someone who'd learned to be absolutely silent about their pain. On the table beside him lay the Book of Hours, open to the miniature of the family at prayer. And Eleanor understood. He was mourning not just his own losses, but all the losses, all the families torn apart by the war, all the futures erased before they could begin. She should have retreated, should have respected his privacy. Instead, Eleanor found herself crossing the room and sitting down beside him on the floor, her wrapper pooling around her like water, her proximity to a man, not her fiancé, in the middle of the night, Absolutely scandalous and absolutely necessary. Ashford looked up, his scarred face wet with tears, his careful control shattered. For a moment they simply looked at each other, really looked, without pretense or protection. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You shouldn't see me like this." "Why not?" Eleanor's hand moved of its own accord, hovering near his shoulder, but not quite touching. "You saw me cry on the terrace. Isn't that what real people do? Break down, feel things too large for proper drawing-room conversation. You're engaged, Eleanor." The use of her first name felt like both violation and relief. "And I'm a burned-out scholar with no prospects cataloguing another man's treasures. This—" he gestured between them. "Whatever this is, it can't happen." "What if I don't want what's supposed to happen? What if I want something real instead?" Ashford's laugh was broken, desperate. "Real is messy. Real is difficult. Real means you'd lose everything, your family, your position, your security. I have nothing to offer you except manuscript knowledge and nightmares. You offered me the most important question anyone's ever asked. What do I actually want?" Eleanor was crying again now, but these tears felt different, cleaner, truer. "And I'm starting to realize the answer terrifies me because it's not what I'm supposed to want." "Then what?" The library door flew open. Eleanor's mother stood there in her nightgown, her face white with rage. Behind her, Martha looked stricken, and Eleanor understood. The maid had heard Eleanor leave her room, had followed her, had gone to fetch Mrs. Hartwell out of loyalty or fear or simple duty. "Get up." Mrs. Hartwell's voice shook. "Both of you, get up this instant." Eleanor rose on trembling legs. Ashford stood as well, putting careful distance between them, but the damage was done. They'd been alone, in the middle of the night, sitting close enough to touch, with tears on both their faces. In Newport society in 1917, that was damning enough without actual impropriety. "Martha, fetch Mr. Hartwell, now." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes never left Eleanor. "You foolish, foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Nothing happened, Mother. We were just talking." "Just talking, in the middle of the night on the floor?" Mrs. Hartwell's voice rose with each question. "Thomas will hear about this. Everyone will hear about this. You've ruined yourself, Eleanor. Ruined this family." "I'll leave immediately," Ashford said quietly. "Tonight. You can tell people I behaved inappropriately, that Miss Hartwell came to the library innocently, and I accosted her. Blame me entirely. Your daughter's reputation will be shredded regardless," Mrs. Hartwell snapped. "Martha has already seen. Servants talk. This will be all over Newport by breakfast." Eleanor's father arrived, took in the scene, and his face aged 10 years in that moment. "Ashford, pack your things. I'll have a car take you to the station." "Father, please, nothing happened." "Something happened," her father said heavily. "Maybe not what it looks like, but something changed. I can see it in both your faces." He looked at Ashford with something that might have been sympathy. "You seemed like a good man. I'm sorry it's come to this." "So am I, sir." Ashford bowed slightly, then, without looking at Eleanor, left the library. The door closed behind him with terrible finality. The morning after dawn came grey and cold, despite the calendar insisting it was late May. Eleanor sat in her room while her mother paced, listing all the ways Eleanor had destroyed herself, her family, their position in society. The words washed over her like rain, meaningless, numbing. Martha brought breakfast on a tray, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry, Miss Eleanor," she whispered. "I only thought—" "You thought you were protecting me." Eleanor's voice sounded hollow. "You were right to fetch my mother. I shouldn't have been there." But even as she said it, Eleanor knew she didn't regret those moments on the library floor when she and Dominic Ashford had been the most honest either of them might ever be with another person. Thomas arrived at 10 o'clock, his face thunderous. Eleanor received him in the drawing room with both her parents present as chaperones, as if she could still be corrupted after already falling from grace. "I want to hear it from you," Thomas said without preamble. "Did you compromise yourself with that man?" "No," Eleanor said truthfully. "We talked, that's all." "In the middle of the night, on the floor, both of you crying." Thomas's jaw worked. "My mother is beside herself. Half of Newport is already gossiping. The Vanderbilts sent a note this morning withdrawing their invitation to their summer ball. They don't want the scandal near their event." "Then perhaps you should marry someone less scandalous." The words emerged calm, almost serene. Thomas stared at her. Her mother gasped. Her father closed his eyes. "Eleanor, you don't mean that," Thomas said carefully. "You're upset. This is all a misunderstanding that we can manage. I'm willing to overlook this incident, but you must never see or speak to that man again. And we should move the wedding forward, next month instead of August. Show everyone that our families stand united." Eleanor looked at the ring on her finger. It really was beautiful, in an impersonal way, like something you'd admire in a museum. Impressive, but cold. "I can't marry you, Thomas." "Eleanor!" Her mother's voice cracked like a whip. But Eleanor continued, calm in the eye of a storm she'd finally stopped running from. "Not because of Dominic Ashford, because I don't love you, because you don't love me, not really. You love the idea of me, the fortune I represent, the social position I bring. Because if we marry, I'll spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone I'm not, and I'd rather be ruined and honest than respectable and hollow." Thomas's face flushed red. "You're being hysterical." "No," Eleanor said clearly. "I'm being honest for the first time in my life." "Mr. Vanderberg," her father said heavily, "perhaps we should take a moment." "There's nothing to take a moment about." Thomas yanked the ring from Eleanor's unresisting finger and pocketed it. "You've made your choice, Miss Hartwell. I hope you enjoy the consequences." He stormed out. Her mother burst into tears. Her father sat down heavily in the nearest chair and looked at Eleanor with an expression she couldn't quite read. Anger, certainly, but also something that might have been reluctant pride. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" her mother wailed. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I've chosen myself." The next 2 weeks were brutal. The Hartwells didn't return to their New York townhouse. That would have looked like retreat. Instead, they endured Newport, where former friends turned away in the street, where invitations dried up, where even the servants whispered. Eleanor became a ghost in her own home, haunting the library that still smelled faintly of old manuscripts and Dominic Ashford's presence. She found a note tucked inside the Book of Hours, written in his careful scholar's hand. "Some things are worth preserving, even when the world insists they should be forgotten. Be brave. D.A." Eleanor kept the note inside her copy of Edith Wharton, a secret between pages. Her father lost the Yale donation. The university didn't want the scandal attached to their collection. Thomas's family spread rumors that Eleanor had behaved inappropriately, that she'd thrown herself at the British scholar, that she was mentally unstable. Some of Newport believed them. Others simply enjoyed the spectacle. Eleanor's mother stopped speaking to her, except to deliver recriminations. Her father, surprisingly, softened as the days passed. One evening, he found Eleanor in the library, running her fingers over the spines of books she'd never be allowed to study properly. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Your grandmother left you a trust, not a fortune, but enough to live independently if you're careful." Eleanor turned to stare at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you truly meant what you said about choosing yourself, then you'll need resources. The trust becomes available when you turn 25, but I could arrange for early access, given the circumstances." "Mother would never allow it." "Your mother doesn't control your grandmother's estate. I do, as executor." He sat down in the chair Ashford had favored. "I don't agree with what you did. I think you were reckless and foolish, but I also think—" He paused, searching for words. When I was young, I wanted to be a professor. Medieval history. My father forbade it. Said commerce was the only respectable path for a Hartwell man. I've spent 40 years moving money around, building a fortune that will outlive me, and I can't remember the last time I felt anything about it except tired. Eleanor's breath caught. Father, don't make me regret this, he said gruffly, and don't expect your mother to forgive you, but if you're going to throw your life away, at least do it on your own terms. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. There's a women's college in Massachusetts, Mount Holyoke. They have a program in library science and historical preservation. I've made inquiries. They'll take you for the fall term, scandal and all. Eleanor took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was information about the program, a recommendation letter from her father, and a check for her first year's tuition. Why? She whispered. Because you reminded me that some things matter more than propriety, and because that young man, Ashford, he wasn't wrong about courage. Her father stood, suddenly looking older than his 58 years. I don't know if you'll ever see him again. I don't know if you should. But I know you deserve a chance to become whoever you're meant to be, not just who we planned for you to be. He left her alone with the envelope, and the remnants of her old life scattered around her like torn pages. Eleanor stared at the Mount Holyoke materials until the words blurred. Massachusetts, education, independence, everything she'd never known she wanted, until Dominic Ashford had asked the simplest, most devastating question, what do you actually want? But leaving Newport meant leaving the possibility of finding him again. And despite everything, the scandal, the ruined engagement, the social death, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd shown her what honesty looked like, even when it cost everything. She pulled out a piece of her father's stationery and began to write. Mr. Dominic Ashford, I don't know where you are or if this letter will find you. My father said you took the first train to Boston, but beyond that, you vanished as thoroughly as if the earth swallowed you. I broke my engagement, not because of you, or not only because of you, because you taught me to ask myself what I truly wanted. And the answer wasn't Thomas or Newport or any version of the life I'd been preparing for since birth. My father has arranged for me to attend Mount Holyoke in the fall. I'll study library science and historical preservation. I'll learn to catalogue the stories people thought worth saving. I'll become someone who matters, not because of my family name, but because of what I choose to do with my own hands and mind. I'm terrified. I'm exhilarated. I'm ruined and free, and I don't know if that makes me brave or just foolish. If you read this and think I'm an impetuous girl who mistook late-night conversation for something more, perhaps you're right. But I think you felt it too. That recognition, that sense that we were more ourselves in those few weeks than we'd been in years of performing for the world. I won't ask you to wait for me. I won't ask you to write back. I won't ask for anything except that you keep doing what you taught me. Asking yourself what you truly want and having the courage to pursue it. Thank you for showing me what real looks like, even when it's messy and difficult and costs everything. With gratitude and something more complicated than I have words for. Eleanor. She addressed the envelope to the Boston Public Library's rare books department, hoping someone there knew him, hoping this wouldn't vanish into the void. Then she sealed it and gave it to Martha, who still looked stricken by guilt every time she saw Eleanor. Mail this for me, Eleanor said. And Martha, you did the right thing. You were trying to protect me. I'm not angry. Martha's eyes filled with tears. But Miss Eleanor, you lost everything. No, Eleanor said gently. I lost things I was supposed to want. There's a difference. June arrived with summer's full heat. The Hartwells prepared to leave Newport for their country estate in Connecticut, a quieter retreat where Eleanor's scandal would fade into the background. The house was being closed up, furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts of the life Eleanor was leaving behind. On their last evening, Eleanor walked down to the cottage behind the stables where Dominic Ashford had lived for those few transformative weeks. The door was unlocked, the interior empty except for a single book on the windowsill, the volume of Edith Wharton that had started their first real conversation. Inside the front cover, in that familiar, careful hand, he'd written, "The only way I can help you is to find a way out, or show you that there is one. Lily Bart, to Selden." The tragedy of the House of Mirth is that Lily never believed there was a way out. You're braver than she was, Eleanor. Don't waste it. If you still want that honest, messy, real thing you talked about, I'll be in Boston, working at the Public Library's manuscript division, waiting to see if you were serious or just momentarily rebellious. I have nothing to offer except scholarship and damaged goods, but if you want me anyway, I'm yours. D.A. Eleanor clutched the book to her chest and laughed and cried at the same time. He'd left her a map, a possibility, a future that wasn't planned or expected or safe, but was entirely her own choice. Boston autumn. September brought Eleanor to Massachusetts, to a college full of women who'd also chosen education over marriage, independence over security. Mount Holyoke's red brick buildings and tree-lined paths felt like sanctuary, like the first deep breath after years of holding herself rigid with propriety. Her roommate, Margaret Chen, was the daughter of Chinese immigrants, studying chemistry and dreaming of medical school, despite laws that would make it nearly impossible. She took one look at Eleanor's Newport wardrobe and society manners and laughed. "You're one of those, rich girl playing at rebellion." "Former rich girl," Eleanor corrected. "Current scandal." "Ooh, scandal. Tell me everything." So Eleanor did, and Margaret listened with sharp intelligence, interrupting occasionally with questions that went straight to the heart of things. "Do you love him?" Margaret asked finally. "I barely know him." "That's not what I asked." Eleanor thought about Dominic's scarred face, his quiet strength, the way he'd made her feel seen for the first time in her life. "I don't know if it's love, but it's real in a way nothing else has ever been." "Then go find him," Margaret said practically. "Boston's not that far. You've already burned your bridges. Might as well see what's on the other side of the river." But Eleanor didn't go to Boston, not yet. First, she studied. She learned about manuscript preservation, about how to handle fragile pages and restore damaged bindings. She learned about library cataloging systems, about how to organize human knowledge into something accessible and useful. She learned slowly how to be Eleanor Hartwell on her own terms, not as someone's daughter or almost wife, but as herself. She wrote Dominic a second letter. "I'm at Mount Holyoke, learning to preserve the stories people thought worth saving, just like you did. Thank you for the Wharton book. You're right that Lily's tragedy was believing she had no way out. I'm trying to believe differently. I'm not ready yet. For Boston, for you, for whatever this could be. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own first, that my choice to leave Newport wasn't just about running toward you, but about running toward myself. But I'm getting there. And if you're still willing to wait, if you're still in Boston cataloging manuscripts and believing in the stories people preserve, I'll find you when I'm ready." Studying hard and thinking of medieval prayer books. E. His response came 2 weeks later. "Take your time. Become who you need to be. I'll be here. The manuscripts aren't going anywhere, and neither am I. Learning patience and rooting for you from Boston. D." The autumn semester passed in a blur of classes and late-night study sessions and conversations with women who were all, in their own ways, fighting to become themselves, despite a world that wanted them to be smaller, quieter, more decorative. Eleanor discovered she had a gift for restoration work, for the delicate process of repairing damaged pages and stabilizing fragile bindings. Her professor, Dr. Catherine Mills, noticed. "You have gentle hands, Doctor," Mills said one afternoon, watching Eleanor work on a water-damaged hymnal. "And you care about the stories? That's more important than technique, which we can teach. The caring that you either have or you don't." "I had a teacher once," Eleanor said carefully. "He showed me how manuscripts connect us to people who lived centuries ago, how their choices to preserve certain stories tell us what mattered to them." "Wise teacher. Is he why you're here?" "Partly, but mostly I'm here for myself." Eleanor looked up from her work. "Is that selfish?" Dr. Mills laughed. "My dear, there's nothing selfish about becoming competent. The world has enough decorative women. What it needs is more women who can actually do things." Eleanor thought about that conversation for days. She'd been raised to be decorative, to grace drawing rooms and bear children and manage households. The idea that she could be useful, competent, someone who did real work that mattered, it was revolutionary. She wrote to her father thanking him. She wrote to her mother, though those letters went unanswered, and she wrote to Dominic, short notes about her classes and her growing certainty that she'd made the right choice, even when it still hurt. Winter came to Massachusetts with snow that turned the campus into something from a fairy tale. Eleanor spent Christmas at the college with other students who had nowhere else to go. International students, orphans, the estranged daughters of families who couldn't forgive their choices. Margaret stayed too, and they made cocoa and read aloud from novels and talked about futures that felt both impossible and inevitable. "Are you going to see him?" Margaret asked on New Year's Eve, while fireworks from Springfield sparkled in the distance. "In the spring," Eleanor said. "When I've finished my first year, when I can show him I'm serious about this, about building a life that's mine." "He already knows you're serious. You broke your engagement and got disowned by your family." "Not disowned, just diverged from." Eleanor smiled. "And I want to see him not as the girl I was in Newport, but as the woman I'm becoming. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Margaret said. "Just don't wait so long that he thinks you've forgotten him." Eleanor pulled out Dominic's most recent letter, received just before Christmas. "The war is changing everything. America's been in it for 9 months now, and Boston's full of soldiers heading to France. I see them sometimes, so young, and I want to warn them about what they're walking into. But what would I say? You'll see things you can't unsee, lose pieces of yourself you can't get back, and if you survive, you'll spend the rest of your life flinching at sudden noises. Forgive the dark tone. The holidays are difficult, but your letters help. Knowing you're there, studying and growing and becoming whoever you need to be, it's a bright spot. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Missing you from Boston. D." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, hearing the pain beneath his careful words. Then she made a decision. And Bridie. The library in winter. The Boston Public Library rose like a cathedral to knowledge, its Renaissance revival architecture grand and welcoming despite the January cold. Eleanor stood on the steps, clutching her carpetbag and gathering courage. She'd told Margaret she was going home to Connecticut for a long weekend. Instead, she'd taken the train to Boston. Inside, the library was warm and hushed, with that particular smell of old books and polished wood that Eleanor had come to love. She asked a clerk about the manuscript division and was directed to the 3rd floor, to a reading room lined with locked cases of rare materials. Dominic stood at a work table with his back to the door, examining something under a magnifying lamp. He wore a simple vest over his shirt, his sleeves rolled up, his dark hair curling against his collar. The winter light from the tall windows caught the scarred side of his face, but from this angle, Eleanor could see only his intensity, his complete absorption in his work. She cleared her throat. He turned. For a long moment, They simply stared at each other across the reading room. Eleanor saw surprise flash across his face, then pleasure, then something more complicated, fear, maybe, or uncertainty. Eleanor. Her name in his voice still had that quality of recognition, of seeing her completely. "What are you doing here?" "Your last letter," she said. "You sounded... I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. I just..." He set down his magnifying glass carefully. "The holidays are hard. But I'm managing. Are you?" Eleanor moved closer, studying his face. He looked thinner than she remembered, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Because you look like someone who's been managing alone for too long. I'm used to being alone. That's not the same as being fine." Eleanor reached the table, separated from him by 3 feet, and a manuscript spread between them. "Tell me the truth, Dominic. How are you, really?" He laughed, a broken sound. "Honestly, I'm drowning. The war dreams are worse in winter. Something about the cold reminds me of the trenches. I work late because I can't sleep. I sleep at my desk because I can't face my empty apartment, and I keep your letters in my jacket pocket and read them when I need to remember that someone sees me as more than a scarred veteran or a useful archivist." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I'm here. I'm real. Not just words on a page. You shouldn't be here." But he didn't sound like he meant it. "You should be at Mount Holyoke, studying, becoming whoever you need to be without this. Me. My damage. Gee, what if your damage is part of what I need?" Eleanor moved around the table until only inches separated them. "What if I need someone who understands what it means to choose the hard, real thing instead of the easy, pretty lie?" "Eleanor, you're 23 years old. You've been at college for 5 months. You don't know what you're asking for. Don't tell me what I know." Her voice came out sharper than intended. "You asked me what I truly wanted. Well, I'm still figuring that out. But I know it includes you, not as a savior or a romantic fantasy, but as a real person. I care about who happens to be drowning and won't ask for help because you've forgotten how." Dominic stared at her, and Eleanor saw the exact moment his careful control cracked. "If I let you in," he said hoarsely, "if I let you see all of it, the nightmares, the damage, the days I can barely function, you'll realize I'm not worth the scandal you endured." Or, Eleanor said gently, "I'll realize you're exactly as imperfect and struggling and real as I am, and that's what makes this worth fighting for." She reached for his hand, the one not hidden in a pocket or curled into a fist. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. She held on anyway. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," Dominic whispered. "I can't promise I'm not too broken for this. But I've been trying so damn hard to be fine, to be worthy, to be enough, and I'm failing. Then stop trying alone." Eleanor pulled him closer. "Let me fail with you. Let's be honest and messy and real together." He kissed her then, or she kissed him. Later, neither could remember who moved first. It was awkward and slightly desperate, tasting of tears and coffee and months of restraint breaking all at once. His scarred face against her palm felt like trust, like vulnerability, like the bravest thing either of them had done. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" "Now you show me your apartment," Eleanor said practically, "and we make you some proper dinner, because I'm betting you've been living on library vending machine sandwiches." "Eleanor, if you come to my apartment, I know what it means. I know the scandal it would cause if anyone found out. I know it's improper and shocking and exactly the kind of thing that got me exiled from Newport." She smiled. "I'm choosing it anyway." His apartment was small, just 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a shabby building near the library. It was painfully neat, the precision of someone trying to maintain control, but cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. No personal items, no photographs, nothing that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just survived. Eleanor shucked off her coat and hat and started opening cupboards. As she'd suspected, tea, crackers, tinned soup, and not much else. When did you last have a proper meal? I eat at the library cafeteria. That's not what I asked. She found eggs, slightly questionable cheese, and some bread that was still soft. I'm making omelettes. You're going to sit down and talk to me. Eleanor, you don't have to. I know. I want to. She pointed at the single armchair by the window. Sit. Talk. Tell me about the nightmares. So while Eleanor cooked, badly, having never done it before but figuring eggs were forgiving, Dominic talked. About the trenches that came back every time he closed his eyes. About the explosion that had burned his face, how he'd lain in a field hospital for 3 days, screaming before the morphine kicked in. About coming back to America and realizing he didn't fit anywhere anymore. Too damaged for society, too American for British military clubs, too haunted for civilian life. The manuscripts help, he said. They're real but distant, important but safe. I can care about medieval prayer books without them disappointing me or dying or asking me to be something I can't anymore. Eleanor served the omelettes, overcooked but edible, and sat on the floor beside his chair because there was nowhere else to sit. People aren't manuscripts. We're messy, and we hurt each other, and we die. But we're also capable of choosing each other day after day, even when it's hard. Is that what you're doing? Choosing me? Every day, Eleanor said simply. Even when you're difficult and damaged and pushing me away to protect me from yourself, I'm choosing you anyway. They ate in silence, broken only by the sounds of the city outside. Trolley bells, distant voices, the ordinary life of Boston continuing around them. When they finished, Dominic pulled Eleanor up to sit beside him in the armchair, both of them squeezed together in a space meant for one. Tell me about Mount Holyoke, he said, about who you're becoming. So Eleanor talked about her classes, about Dr. Mills and manuscript restoration, about Margaret and the community of women all fighting to become more than ornaments, about the slow, difficult work of building a self from scratch when all the old certainties had been stripped away. I'm not the girl from Newport anymore, she said, but I'm not entirely sure who I am instead. Some days that feels like freedom. Other days, it's terrifying. You're Eleanor Hartwell, who broke her engagement, chose education, and took a train to Boston in January to check on a scarred scholar who writes depressing letters. Dominic's arm around her waist tightened slightly. You're brave and stubborn and real in a way most people never manage. So are you. You survived a war that destroyed you and came back and built something meaningful anyway. You catalogue stories and preserve beauty and somehow still believe things matter, even when you're drowning. I believe you matter, he said quietly, even when I can't believe in much else. Eleanor turned to face him in the cramped chair. Then let me matter enough to help. Stay with me tonight. Not like that, just stay. Let me prove that you don't have to do this alone anymore. Eleanor, if you stay here overnight, I know. More scandal. My reputation, whatever's left of it, will be completely destroyed. But my reputation was built on lies and propriety and pretending. I'd rather be honest and ruined than respectable and hollow. Dominic searched her face. You're sure? I'm terrified and determined and completely sure. She kissed him again, softer this time. Teach me how to help you through the nightmares. Show me what real looks like when it's difficult. Let me choose you, every day, in all the messy ways that matter. So she stayed. They lay together in his narrow bed, fully clothed, Eleanor's arm across his chest so he'd know she was there when the dreams came. And they did come. Around 3 a.m, Dominic jerked awake with a strangled sound, his whole body rigid with remembered terror. You're in Boston, Eleanor whispered, holding him through the shaking. You're safe. The war is an ocean away. I'm here. It took 20 minutes for him to fully return to himself, to believe he wasn't back in the trenches with fire raining down. When he finally relaxed against her, his voice was raw. "This is what you're signing up for. This, every night, maybe forever. Then we'll deal with it every night, together." Eleanor pressed her face against his shoulder. That's what choosing each other means. In the grey light before dawn, Dominic said, "I can't ask you to give up everything for me." "You're not asking. I'm choosing. There's a difference." Eleanor propped herself up to look at him. "I know this is fast. I know it's impulsive. I know all the sensible reasons we should slow down. But I also know that I feel more myself with you, even like this, at 3 a.m, with nightmares and scandal, than I ever felt in Newport pretending to be perfect." "You're impossibly young and impossibly brave," Dominic said, "and I'm terrified I'll ruin you." "Then let's be terrified together." They stayed like that until morning came fully, bringing the ordinary sounds of a city waking up. Eleanor knew she should return to Mount Holyoke before she was missed, but leaving felt like tearing something essential. "I'll come back," she promised. "Every few weeks we'll figure this out as we go." "Eleanor, no sensible objections, no protecting me from yourself. We're doing this messily and honestly, or not at all." Dominic kissed her forehead, gentle as a prayer. "Then we're doing this. God help us both." Spring Truth March brought Eleanor back to Mount Holyoke with a secret that burned like coals in her chest. She and Dominic were, what? Courting seemed too formal, lovers too scandalous, though they hadn't crossed that final line. They were choosing each other week by week, visit by visit, building something real from the wreckage of their former lives. Margaret knew, of course. "You're glowing," she said flatly. "It's disgusting. Tell me everything." So Eleanor did, and Margaret listened with scientific precision. "So you're sneaking to Boston every few weeks to sleep, clothed, beside a traumatized war veteran while he has nightmares, and you think this is sustainable. When you say it like that, I'm not criticizing. I'm asking what your plan is. You graduate next year. Then what? You can't keep this secret forever." Eleanor had been avoiding that question. Her trust fund would support her, but society's judgment was another matter. A woman living alone with a man she wasn't married to. That was beyond scandal into outright ruin. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I'm not giving him up." "Then make it legitimate," Margaret said practically. "Marry him. We've known each other less than a year, most of it by letter. And yet you're willing to sneak to Boston and risk expulsion to sleep beside him. Seems like you've already made your choice. You're just afraid to make it official." Margaret's words haunted Eleanor through April's thaw and May's blossoms. Was she afraid? Or was she being sensible, taking time to be sure before making another irreversible choice? Her answer came in a letter from her father. "Eleanor, your mother has been making inquiries. She knows you've been traveling to Boston when you claim to be studying. She's hired a private investigator, a Mr. Horace Pemberton, to discover what you're doing there. I've delayed him as much as I can, but he's competent and motivated by your mother's money. He'll find out about Ashford within a month, maybe sooner. I'm telling you this not to control you, but to prepare you. Whatever you're going to do, marry him, leave him, make it public, do it on your own terms before someone else does it for you. Your mother wants ammunition to prove you're unfit, to force you back under her control. Don't give her that satisfaction. Still proud of your courage, even when it terrifies me. Father." Eleanor's hands shook as she read the letter twice, 3 times. A private investigator. Her mother's last desperate attempt to reclaim control over a daughter who'd slipped away. She took the next train to Boston. Dominic was working late, as usual. Eleanor let herself into his apartment with the key he'd given her. Another small intimacy, another step towards something permanent. She waited in the single armchair until she heard his footsteps on the stairs, his key in the lock. "Eleanor?" He looked surprised but pleased until he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "My mother hired a private investigator. He's looking into my Boston trips. Eleanor held out her father's letter. We have maybe a month before he discovers us. Dominic read the letter, his expression closing down into something careful and controlled. Then you should stop coming. For your sake. Don't. Eleanor stood, facing him across the small room. Don't protect me by pushing me away. I'm so tired of people making choices for me to protect my reputation or my future or my delicate feminine sensibilities. Eleanor, if this becomes public, it will become public regardless. My mother will make sure of it. Eleanor took a breath, steadying herself. So I'm choosing how. I'm choosing you. Publicly, permanently, if you'll have me. Are you... Dominic's voice caught. Are you proposing to me? I'm proposing that we stop hiding, that we get married quietly before my mother can weaponize this, that we build a life together that's ours, not society's, not anyone's expectations. She moved closer. I'm proposing that we choose the hard, real thing and deal with the consequences together. I have nothing to offer you. A scholar's salary, this apartment, nightmares that may never stop. And I have a broken engagement, a scandalized family, and a stubborn refusal to be anything but myself. We're a perfect match. Eleanor smiled, though her eyes were wet. Say yes, Dominic. Choose me back. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, his scarred face pressed against her hair. Yes. God, yes. Every day for the rest of our lives. Yes. They were married 2 weeks later in a small church in Cambridge, with Margaret as Eleanor's witness and a colleague from Dominic's manuscript division as his. No white dress, no society guests, no champagne reception. Just vows spoken with shaking voices and rings purchased from a modest jeweler who didn't ask questions. Eleanor wore a simple blue suit. Dominic wore his best vest and jacket. The minister looked at their faces, young and scarred and determined, and spoke about courage being the foundation of love. You're sure? The minister asked Eleanor privately before the ceremony. You understand what you're choosing? I'm choosing honesty over propriety, Eleanor said, and the man who taught me the difference. When they emerged from the church as Mr. and Mrs. Dominic Ashford, rain was falling softly, turning Cambridge's streets silver. They had nowhere to go except Dominic's small apartment, which was now Eleanor's home too. I should feel different, Eleanor said, studying her wedding band. Simple gold, no diamonds. But I just feel right. Good, Dominic said, because there's no going back now. I don't want to go back. That night, they consummated their marriage with nervous tenderness, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention Dominic gave to manuscripts and Eleanor gave to restoration work. It was awkward and meaningful and entirely theirs. Afterward, lying in the narrow bed that would need replacing, Eleanor said, My mother will disown me completely when she finds out. Probably. Dominic's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Are you ready for that? I've been ready since I broke my engagement. This is just making it official. She turned to face him in the darkness. What about you? Ready to have a wife who comes with scandal and a limited trust fund? I'm ready to have you, Dominic said simply. Everything else is just details. Investigation. The private investigator found them 3 weeks after the wedding. Eleanor answered the knock on their apartment door to find a middle-aged man in a brown suit holding a notebook and looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Ashford? He asked, confirming what he'd already discovered. Yes. Eleanor didn't invite him in. I'm Horace Pemberton. Your mother hired me to investigate your activities in Boston. He shifted his weight. I've completed my investigation. You're married to Dominic Ashford, formerly of the British Army, now employed by the Boston Public Library. You've been living here since mid-May. Is there a question in all that? Eleanor kept her voice level. No, ma'am, just, I need to give my report to Mrs. Hartwell. She'll likely use it to challenge your access to your grandmother's trust, claim you're mentally unfit or were coerced. He looked genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, I'm just doing my job. I understand. Eleanor started to close the door, then paused. Mr. Pemberton, what's in your actual report? The facts, I mean. That you married respectably, if hastily. That your husband is employed and educated. That your apartment is modest but clean. That neighbors report you as quiet and polite. He met her eyes. Nothing scandalous, Mrs. Ashford, just two young people living carefully within their means. But my mother won't see it that way. No, ma'am, she won't. She'll see what she wants to see. After he left, Eleanor sat on the floor and tried to breathe through the panic. Her mother would fight the trust, would spread lies, would do everything possible to punish Eleanor for choosing herself. Dominic came home to find her there, still on the floor, staring at nothing. The investigator came, Eleanor said. My mother knows everything. Then we deal with it. Dominic sat beside her, solid and present. We knew this was coming. She'll take the trust. I won't have anything. You'll have me. We'll have my salary. We'll manage. Dominic, a manuscript archivist doesn't earn enough to support two people comfortably. Then I'll find additional work, teach evening classes, take on private restoration projects. He took her hand. Eleanor, I survived 3 years in trenches. I can survive anything with you. But what if? No what ifs. We deal with what actually happens, not what might happen. He pulled her close. Your mother can't take you away from me. She can't undo our marriage. The worst she can do is make things financially difficult, and we'll handle that. Eleanor leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. I'm scared. Good. That means you're paying attention. But fear doesn't get to make our choices. The letter from Eleanor's mother arrived 2 days later, delivered by a lawyer rather than the post. It was brutal in its precision. Eleanor was a disgrace, had married beneath herself to spite her family, was clearly mentally unstable, and would receive nothing from the Hartwell family now or ever. The trust would be challenged in court. But her father sent a separate letter, this one in his own hand. Eleanor, your mother is beyond reason, but I am not. I've reviewed your grandmother's trust documents with my own attorney. The trust is ironclad. It passes to you at 25 regardless of your mother's wishes or mine. Your marriage cannot void it. However, I've also learned something that may help you now, rather than waiting 2 more years. Your grandmother included a provision. If you married and established an independent household before 25, a portion of the trust, $5,000, could be released early for your use. I'm authorizing that release. Consider it a wedding gift from a grandmother who believed women should control their own destinies, and a father who's learning to believe the same. I've also done some investigating of my own. Dominic Ashford, Harvard, 1914, medieval literature, honors. Family in Boston, respectable import business. Served with British forces 1914-1916, honorably discharged after injury at Verdun. Currently employed Boston Public Library, well regarded by colleagues. Published 3 papers on medieval manuscripts, considered promising in his field. In other words, educated, honorable, employed, and from decent family. Not the match I'd have chosen, but not the disaster your mother claims. I'm telling you this because someone should have investigated him before now, should have seen what I see, a serious young man trying to build something meaningful from very little. That takes character. I won't be able to maintain a relationship with you while your mother is alive. She'd make both our lives unbearable. But know that I'm proud of you. You chose honestly over comfort, and that's harder than most people ever manage. Your father, Charles Hartwell. P.S. The enclosed is a wedding gift. Use it for something that matters. The check fell from the envelope. $5,000 more money than Eleanor and Dominic had seen in one place in their lives. Eleanor wept. Dominic held her. And slowly, the panic transformed into something else. Hope. Building real. With the trust money, everything changed. They moved to a larger apartment with actual furniture and a second room that could be Dominic's study. Eleanor purchased proper cooking supplies and taught herself, with Margaret's bemused assistance, to make meals that didn't taste like ash. She finished her degree at Mount Holyoke in spring 1918, graduating with honors in library science. Dr. Mills offered her a reference that glowed. Eleanor Ashford demonstrates exceptional skill in manuscript restoration and preservation. Her work is meticulous, her dedication absolute, and her integrity unquestionable. The Boston Public Library hired her for their conservation department, not because of Dominic, but because she was genuinely good at the work. She spent her days carefully repairing damaged books and manuscripts, preserving stories for future generations. Dominic worked in the floor above, cataloguing acquisitions. They rode the trolley together each morning, ate lunch in separate departments to avoid accusations of favoritism, and came home each evening to their small apartment that smelled of book dust and possibility. The nightmares continued, but less frequently. Some nights Dominic slept peacefully, his scarred face relaxed in lamplight. Other nights Eleanor held him through the terror, speaking him back to reality. They learned each other's damage and each other's resilience. Margaret visited monthly, bringing Chinese food and unsolicited advice. "You two are disgustingly functional," she announced in November 1918, when the war finally ended and Boston exploded with celebration. "Most couples this young are still figuring out how to compromise. You've already built a whole life." "We didn't have a choice," Eleanor said, watching Dominic through the window as he spoke with their downstairs neighbor about the armistice news. "We had to figure it out fast or fail completely. Most people would have failed. You didn't." Margaret helped herself to more tea. "Your mother's still spreading rumors. She tells everyone I'm mentally unstable and married a disfigured fortune hunter." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact. Newport seemed like another lifetime, another person's pain. "People who matter know the truth, and people who don't matter, I'm learning not to care." Christmas 1918 brought an unexpected visitor, Eleanor's father, unannounced, carrying a package wrapped in plain paper. "Your mother thinks I'm in New York on business," he said, standing awkward in their small living room. "I can't stay long." "You came anyway." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I wanted to meet him properly. Your husband." Charles Hartwell extended his hand to Dominic. "Mr. Ashford." "Sir." Dominic shook his hand, his posture military straight. Charles studied Dominic's scarred face without flinching. "My daughter chose you. I've spent 2 years trying to understand why she'd throw away everything for a man she barely knew. I think I finally understand." "Sir?" "You see her, really see her, not just the ornamental version we created." Charles set down his package. "I spent my life building a fortune and forgot to build a relationship with my daughter. You did better in a few weeks than I managed in 23 years. "I love her," Dominic said simply. "Everything else follows from that." "Yes, I'm beginning to see that love is rather the point, isn't it?" Charles smiled sadly. "The package is your mother's, your grandmother's, papers, her journals, letters, documents about the trust. I thought you should have them, Eleanor, understand where your independence came from." After he left, Eleanor opened the package with shaking hands. Inside were decades of her grandmother's life, journals documenting a marriage of convenience that became genuine partnership, letters to lawyers establishing the trust, notes about wanting something better for her granddaughter. One letter, written just before her grandmother died, was addressed to Eleanor. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're